You okay with that? Randy seems to be working from the front. Try to get her in here. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session of the Maine Philanthropy Partners Conference. We are here today for the Hogan Philanthropy Consulting's presentation about transforming philanthropy, how the rising generation is revolutionizing giving, engaging communities. And we have almost all of our speakers here today. We have Hannah Quimby, Jenny Johnson, Sharna Goldseeker, and Randy Hogan, who pulled this all together, but is somehow stuck in the general session and not in the speaker session. So we're trying to moderate that and figure that out. But Randy, or Hannah and Jenny and Sean have assured me that Randy prepared them very well to pull this all together. And so I just want to remind all of you about our community agreements. Those are posted in the session information, and I think we can just sort of take it away. I know we're kind of a hybrid approach here right now, but we'll do what we can with what we have, and it's a pretty good crew. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great. Thanks, Gabe, for having us. And thanks to Randy, who, as you said, did such a good job preparing us. You can see in the chat that she's already posing the question and launching the poll. And thanks to all of you who are being engaging participants with us in the session. She let us know the questions she would ask us and even the order in which we would speak. So we could probably carry on if that's okay. And Randy, I hope you'll join us when you get here. And I'm excited to be sharing the floor with colleagues Hannah and Jenny this morning. So we are here because we are amid the largest wealth transfer ever. And NextGen are stepping into philanthropic roles. And as Randy said in her description for the session, wielding their financial power. So she asked us to start off really talking a little bit about some of the intergenerational wealth transfer and the impact that it's had on families, nonprofits, foundations, and communities, and to ask us to all chime in about our experience. So I'll start and turn it over then to Jenny and Hannah, if that's okay, you guys. I'll get rolling. I come to this work really wearing a personal and a professional hat. Personally, my great uncle worked in the real estate business in Baltimore, Maryland. He owned row houses. If you've ever taken the Amtrak train down the Northeast Corridor, you've seen those row houses from the Amtrak. And that was the family business. And everyone moved into that business, including my dad, who worked for his great uncle for many years. And when my uncle passed away, he wasn't married, he didn't have children. And when the will was read, which is not how I recommend engaging your next generation, my father discovered he was to actually transfer his uncle's estate into a charitable foundation and was set to steward that philanthropy. So this happened the year before I was born. The foundation and I are 46 this year, just to be transparent. And so I watched my dad learn what it meant to steward a charitable legacy and think about how even if you're only one foundation, you can't sort of make an impact and make change and serve a community on your own, no matter how many resources you had. So learn early lessons about collaboration, about working with building a community foundation, a regional association, a vibrant nonprofit sector to be able to make an impact together. And I feel grateful for that legacy. Also along the way, I have the same last name as the foundation, and I felt, like Warren Buffett now says, I had inherited the ovarian lottery. I felt like I didn't do anything to earn this opportunity. I was born into this next generation of philanthropic stewardship, and so I set off to earn my right to that legacy. And along the way, I met a lot of other next gen who, my colleague Kristen Keffler likes to say, felt paralyzed by predecessor. How do I step in and carry on in the shoes of the predecessors who loom large? Or how do I not be paralyzed by privilege when I have so much that others don't? And how come, even if I'm comfortable with the role I'm in, do I not be paralyzed by possibilities? There's 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States, 10 million around the country. Gabe, I don't know how many are in Maine, but sometimes one can be overwhelmed by choice. And so the work I've done for the last 20 years is really helping Next Gen not be paralyzed by, but instead find their philanthropic purpose and direction. And it is through that work at this nonprofit consulting and donor education group called 2164 that I've seen anecdotally and then conducted research to really underscore what Randy is teeing up for us today. So along with my partner from the Johnson Center, Michael Moody, who holds the first endowed chair of family philanthropy, he and I set out starting about 10 years ago to research Gen X and millennials and understand how if 1% of the country owns 43% of the wealth, and as Randy said, we're in the largest wealth transfer ever with 59 trillion being transferred to the next generation, half of that going charitably. How do we think about this next generation that has an outsized potential to make change? And many of them not waiting till the sunset of their lives to retire into philanthropic leisure, but seeing that the issues and the needs are great, wanting to step in at the forefront of their lives and think about the decades ahead that they can allocate financial resources for change. And lastly, are willing to revolutionize, as our book, Generation Impact, How Next Gen Donors Will Revolutionize Giving says, how will they bring their willingness to take risks and do things differently in the philanthropic sector? Because as one of them said in our book, you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. You have to take risks and try some new things, even in philanthropy, to make change. And so we're excited about the potential of Next Gen, who are eager to step into their imminent responsibilities. And I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my colleagues. So that's a little bit to set the stage of the context for our conversation. Jenny.
Thanks, Sharna. And I would also echo that Randy really did a wonderful job of kind of pulling this together, and she gave us great kind of questions in order. So we're just going to try to get our way through this as best we can. But thanks everybody for kind of your graciousness and managing through this with us. So I'm Jenny Johnson. I'm the director of the Family Philanthropy Resource Center at the Minneapolis Foundation. And that's like a real mouthful. But essentially, I work with a number of families, mostly multi-generational, to think about what their charitable impact looks like. And every community foundation functions a little bit differently. Ours has a number of donor advised funds. And so I get to work with a lot of different families to kind of think about what is it that we care about? How do we align our values and make sure that that's kind of the philanthropic values that we're living out as well? And it is, an incredible opportunity to be in that space with families and help them think through that, and then really help them figure out where it is that they want to be giving, how they want to be making impact. What Randy had asked me to kind of touch on here was how am I seeing kind of this next gen behaving? What are they asking about? What are they wanting to know more about? How is it potentially different from the generation above them? And I will be honest and say, I have not been doing this work for 50 years, so I can't tell you what was happening 50 years ago, but I can tell you what I'm seeing today. And I think that there's just a lot more openness kind of within multi-generational families to be talking about philanthropy and values. And so I think that parents today are starting to bring their kids in younger and younger, and are really looking for opportunities to start engaging their kids at a very young age, so that they're learning what it is that their children value, and then also getting the experience of being able to share as parents what they value as well. And so I think it's becoming this really important two-way street. And I think what I've seen is a lot of Next Gen really feeling empowered to step into that space and to say, this is what I care about, and parents responding pretty positively to that, and really saying, okay, I want to know about you as a person and what it is that you care about, and how we can all be engaged in this conversation. The other thing that I think I've at least observed, and I'm not in conversation about this as much with kind of the generation above, but the Next Gen donors, I feel, have been a lot more open about thinking through their own power and privilege, and who they are and how that affects how they come to philanthropy. And so I feel like there are a lot of questions about, my identity and how I show up in this community, and really a lot of self-awareness and just desire to think about that and then be really thoughtful and deliberate in how they're working with nonprofits, working with community, and just, again, that really thoughtfulness that I've seen a lot of them bring to their philanthropy. So I think that that's been a pretty incredible thing as well. So with that, I will pass it along to Hannah.
Right, thank you. I'm Hannah Quimby. I'm the director of the Quimby Family Foundation, which is based here in Maine. I'm currently in Portland, Maine. And one of the first things that Randy had asked me to talk about was just a bit of my upbringing and how sort of the path from my childhood growing up off the grid to heading up our family foundation. So I am 42, so that could be a very long story, and I'll try and keep it brief. My parents were really inspired by Helen and Scott Nearing. A number of the book they had read, and they were part of the Back to the Land movement in the 1970s, and so they moved to Maine with about $3,000, and that at the time afforded them land. They were able to buy about 50 acres of land and build a cabin in the woods. It was about a mile off of a dead-end dirt road in Piscataquis County in central Maine. And a few years later, my twin brother Lucas and I were born, and my mom kind of jokes about we were really raised with what she calls benign neglect. We had just pretty much complete freedom to spend, our days. Just we didn't have any childcare until we went to Head Start. So we were with my parents and then outdoors exploring, playing in the stream and getting lost in the woods and sledding and building forts. And so it was a pretty idyllic childhood. It's funny now to sort of see how there's so much conversation around how young people are overscheduled and that there's really limited unstructured time, especially in the outdoors, because that's really, I feel really fortunate that that's, really all we had. And then my parents ended up divorcing, and my mom was hitchhiking to work. When we were growing up, my mom was waiting tables at a local diner, and my dad was a disc jockey at the local radio station, WDME in Dover Foxcroft. And so they worked really, really part-time. Divorced, my mom was hitchhiking to work, and Bert, who is Bert from Bert's Bees, ended up being the namesake for the company. He was a beekeeper who had moved to Maine from New York, and he picked her up and they hit it off, became friends, and she started using some of the wax that he'd been storing and honey that he had saved up, and just bottling the honey and making labels. She's an artist, and making candles and taking it to craft fairs. And fast forward from there, and obviously a long story there, but she sold 80% of the company when I was in my 20s, and then the company sold again to Clorox for almost $1 billion, which is just mind-blowing to me now. So my mom is not a materialistic person and did not come from money, and clearly we were not raised with many resources and financial resources and disposable income. So her goal was pretty much to always sell the company for as much as she would be able to, with the desire to purchase land for conservation, and then to create family foundations, which she's now created 3 foundations. And so the first was in 2004, in the Quimby Family Foundation. And we initially met with a philanthropic advisor, and my mom and my brother and I sat down and we worked with the advisor to figure out where we had common interests and established a mission, vision, values, learned about the nuts and bolts of operating a foundation. And then it was just the three of us initially, and then we had additional family members that were brought in and some people from the community. And it was really just the way the foundation operated was very much a, family affair and board affair where we would all just review proposals together and simply vote in this online system and then tally the scores. And that's how we would make grant awards. And over time, I had become more and more involved in the work and of the foundation. And it became clear that if we wanted to operate in the way that we were all really desiring, which was being responsive and having site visits and really getting to know the nonprofit community and other funders, and just being more hands-on, and also maintaining an open process, which led to hundreds of proposals. It ended up being a bit daunting for volunteer board. So I ended up becoming the director of the foundation full time. And it's as Sharna had mentioned, it's really, I have the same last name as the foundation, and it's been an interesting journey, just personally, the association with Maine as a small state. So a lot of people know my family story, but just considering my own privilege and then my role in the foundation. And it's just been an amazing opportunity and an incredible privilege to be involved with so many of the nonprofits that are doing really hopeful and inspiring work that is so well aligned with the things that I really care about, to be able to help to collaborate and be able to support that work. So it's been a journey of learning for sure, and something that I'm really proud to be a part of.
And I had the privilege of talking to you about this a little bit when we were writing Generation Impact. And I wonder if you want to say a word more about how you don't just see yourselves as gatekeepers of proposals, but like hearing you talk about how you intentionally try to build relationships with grantees and really understand what they need, not assume. Do you want to say a word more about that? And we can talk more about engaging next-gen donors in a meaningful way because of the way they like to work.
Yeah. I have a lot to say on that. One of the follow-up questions that Randy had was to speak directly to that. So do you want me just to say a couple things about it? Yeah, and then I can go into more detail as the conversation goes on. I think that one of the things that happened for us, having not come from a family that had a generations of philanthropic experience, or personally coming to this work with a degree that may have given me more knowledge of the operations of a foundation or nonprofits and philanthropy. We got a lot of advising and worked with consultants that, for better, for worse, I think we got some really great recommendations and suggestions, and then some things that in retrospect I look back on and I think that we would have, probably done a little bit differently. But one of the things I've mentioned before to a few people is early on it was recommended that we create a website, but we don't put any of our contact information so that no one would be able to reach out to us via email or by phone, and to have a closed process, because we would be inundated with proposals and it would just be too overwhelming, which, now I look back on, and fortunately we didn't completely take that, we didn't take that advice. But I think how funny that is now that was the advice at the time, because the relationship is so much a part of what makes the work so meaningful. And in order to really know what's happening in communities all around the state, you have to have that. So it's been some undoing of some of the things that we had initially been guided with, and then just really listening to nonprofits and there's a great funder community. We've been a part of, a group of funders that meet frequently that have some overlap in mission, and just site visits and meeting with people in person and really collaborating and I think it's been really important to just be receptive to feedback. And I feel like I've been really fortunate to get some really pivotal feedback that's led to changes in our process. Yeah.
So I think related to that, Hannah, I would add, thinking about kind of next gen donors and things that are important and priorities. I think when you talked about collaboration and a funder network, I think that peer group is something that I've seen be really important to kind of this next gen of donors. And at the Minneapolis Foundation, we created a program called Fourth Generation 11 years ago now. So it's been around for a while, an entire decade, which seems crazy. But Fourth Gen was really designed to say, we want to give people in this next generation that peer learning experience and grant making experience together. So it's a collective giving fund. We don't put an age range on it, but generally most people that participate in Fourth Gen are in their probably 20s to, I would say, early 40s. You can participate year after year if you like, or you can, do a year or two and then take a break. You can come back. So it is designed to be a process that's pretty open and we hope accessible. And then each member puts money into this pot, and then they do a collective giving grant round. And what I think is a cool part of Fourth Gen is that they pick a topic every year collaboratively. So there's usually 5 topics that are kind of voted on. They pick that topic together. They spend about 3 months learning about that issue area or topic. Then they source organizations together. They have this massive Google document that everybody types into to look at organizations that they want to consider. They then kind of narrow that down, invite organizations to write proposals, and then do grant making together. And I have never been in the room as the grant making decisions are made, but I hear that it can get pretty passionate, right? People are really excited and want to be, advocating for organizations that they think should be supported through this process. Now, what I think has been really indicative of the next gen is that they're doing an iterative process. So every year they also seek feedback from their grantees and think about how can we improve this process. And I think, Hannah, to the point you were making about all right, we don't want to put a burden on nonprofits. Right. So we want to be in this collaborative partnership together. And so if what we're asking is something that, we're not even using, or just something that feels not doable, we want to hear about that from you so that we can fix our process and think about how we can keep doing better. And so I think it's been a unique experience for the people that have participated. At our foundation, we've had some children of donors that have participated, and then it's also open to the community at large. So it's really been this pretty cool communal giving program that, again, I think is we try to refine the process kind of as next gen donors tell us this is what we want to be doing instead.
In listening to you both talk about spending time with grantees and spending time in peer cohorts, really learning about funding, I'm just mindful how most people in the nonprofit space often say, it's really hard to get next gen engaged. And through all of our research and informal work with next gen donors, we often hear, look, we don't want to get engaged with everything. We don't have time to come to every event you invite me to, join every committee, right? I'm not at that stage of my life, but it doesn't mean I don't want to get involved. Actually, I want to go all in on a couple of things that I really care about and give of my time, my treasure, my talent, and my ties. So, we heard about Hannah spending really time that actually I feel like I heard you say, Hannah, how could you not spend the time? It's actually building the relationship that's essential to figuring out what a donor needs. It's not a burden. It's actually the way I think next gen donors like to work. Even during the pandemic now, we hear next gen donors are making masks, and the older ones are driving food to, food pantries that need delivery, or 20 and 30 somethings with, financial or legal acumen are lending their their time where nonprofits need it. Again, not just doing anything, but giving of their talent as well. So, can I help you file for a PPP loan? Can I help you redo your business plan or revise your budget? Using their skills. Oftentimes, I think nonprofits assume Next Gen don't have time because they won't join a board or they won't come to a gala. But there's so many ways, so many mechanisms we forget for engagement that we forget we have, whether on the nonprofit side to tap into the talent and skills of the Next Gen to help, or on the family foundation side, even if you're not ready to put the Next Gen on the board, do they have the technology capability to help build your website or write your newsletter or your press release when you're ready to annually? Do they have the financial skills to be on your investment committee or liaise with your investment managers or write an investment policy or research impact investing? Did they have the skills to do social site visits and type up notes and report back to the family? Or even if you just want them to bring the family together, can they write a newsletter and post it every month about what the Family Foundation's doing? So definitely interest in time and talent. We also fielded a survey last summer to see how Next Gen were responding during the crises as they were emerging, the pandemic, the economic collapse, the racial reckoning. And one of the other things we heard is people aren't just seeing their philanthropy or their giving as their grant making out of the foundation. They were looking at all the resources they had to give. So even thinking about their consumer spending, could they spend at a local business or a BIPOC owned organization rather than a national, online delivery service? Could they lend their business, like the engineers for their company? One woman said, we gave it to our United Way to help them build their digital platform that needed reinforcing when everyone was going to start giving online. So, thinking holistically about the sources that they could use to make an impact. And then lastly, Jenny and Hannah already gave you examples of this, but we added ties to this age-old maxim of time, talent, treasure. We added ties because this power of learning with a peer group and getting inspiration and thinking of strategy and leveraging dollars, frankly. So if Next Gen can't give exorbitant amounts at young ages, they can leverage each other's financial capital to make bigger gifts. And as they start growing into their philanthropic opportunities. So just wanted to underscore, kind of broaden maybe the way we can think about how to engage Next Gen in our family philanthropy and in our nonprofits as well.
I would just echo that more and more Next Gen donors I'm talking to are really talking about deeper engagement. So everything that Sharna just said, just that they're saying, I want to find ways to volunteer. And I think it's totally right that they're not necessarily looking for board opportunities. And maybe at some point, right? But that's not what I'm hearing them come to me saying. They're not like, oh, how can I join 6 boards? They're really saying, how can I find the thing that I really care about, and then be all in on that and find ways to volunteer. And sometimes it is totally not glamorous, right? Like sometimes they're like, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to do what that organization needs because I really believe in the mission of this. And I think that that also is a really just, pretty incredible characteristic that you can harness as you're thinking about how to start engaging Next Gen, or you probably already are. I think the next thing that Randy had wanted us to talk about, and I hope you guys are okay that I'll move on, is just, what issues and topics are Next Gen donors really bringing to the forefront, and how are we hearing about ways that they're transforming philanthropy? And kind of from the Minneapolis perspective, we've had, I think, a pretty bright light shown on our city in the last, year or so, last couple of years. And we're coming up right on the anniversary of George Floyd's murder, in the midst of Derek Chauvin's trial, who was convicted of murdering George Floyd. There was also another young man that was shot in Minneapolis by a police officer. And so there's been a lot of civil unrest, a lot of conversation, a lot of people just kind of saying, what can I do? And I think that that's, not indicative to just Next Gen donors. It's really kind of community wide. What I'm seeing happening though at the Next Gen donor space is I'm seeing kids really pushing their parents in pretty incredible ways, because I have these parents now calling me that are like, my kids are talking about like this racial and economic justice stuff. Like, can you talk to me about that? Like, what's going on? Like, what's even the language I should be using? How do I have this conversation now with my, 20 and 30-year-old kids that are pushing to talk about this and really want to be in this conversation. Sharna, you talked about kind of how Next Gen are looking at ways that they can be all in. I have a number of Next Gen donors who, for gifts now, they only shop at Black-owned businesses, right? Or they really try to stay very local to their community in terms of the way that they're spending their money, and in terms of the way that they're giving their money as well. And so I feel like what we're seeing is this next generation living their values in all ways, right? So it's not just about their philanthropy, but it's really about kind of everything. I think they're also pushing investment because they're saying, how can we be doing more impact investment? How can we be doing more local investment? How can we really be thinking about how everything we do matters and should be in service of kind of what our, holistic values are? And it's been, a really, I think, pretty unique experience for parents and kids to be in this conversation together. And I think for a lot of parents to say, I'm looking to you now as the expert to help me learn and bring me along on this, and then let's think about how we can fund in this space. The Minneapolis Foundation in particular has had a couple of initiatives specifically around racial and economic justice. Our most recent grant round was completely devoted to that. And we're also very engaged in the criminal justice reform space, and actually were even prior to George Floyd and Daunte Wright's death. We've been kind of working in that space for a while. Now, 3-4 years ago, I did not have a lot of donors calling me up being like, how can I know about that criminal justice work you guys are doing and how can I get involved? However, within the last year to year and a half, I've had a lot of Next Gen calling and saying, I really want to know what you guys are doing. Who are you funding? Can you help me think through the framework of why it is that you're funding those organizations? And then can you help me strategize about how we get my family involved in wanting to think about how we're a part of this conversation and how we're working for change as well. So that's at least kind of what my experience has been in seeing how Next Gen donors are really at the forefront of this conversation.
From there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have certainly don't have quite as much interaction with Next Gen donors, I think, as the two of you. But I think from one of the things I think about often with our foundation is just there's certain parameters that we are working within. So my mom had created a donor legacy statement, which her desire is for this really to be something that brings our family together. And so we have board members that are all basically it's my descendants of my maternal grandmother are eligible for board service. So thinking about like within the confines of that that document, like how can we bring in different perspectives, because we are obviously, it's somewhat of an insular perspective of just this one small, and we're a very small family. And so that's one of the things that I'm thinking about often is how can we, there's a couple of foundations that I've gotten to know that are doing participatory grant making. So Main Initiatives is one community foundation, and I've been a part of their participatory grant making process, which is both it's a 3-day learning more about their focus right now is racial justice. So it's both a learning sort of workshop with a group of people and then reviewing proposals and working together on making the decisions. And we wouldn't be able to transform entirely to that type of process, but having an advisory board. And then Jenny, you had mentioned investments. That's also something that I see with the next gen on our board being very interested in how can we invest locally and not have as much of the traditional investments as we have had in the past, and taking the steps to learn more about that. So that's a couple of the ways that we're able to work within the structure that we have with our foundation. I do also, I really credit my mom for being very, very open to new ways of working, new funding, and our board in general. I mean, I think because we are really small, we don't have this laborious process of, we started a new grants program last year. That's Wabanaki Grants Program, and half of our grants budget went to Native-led and serving organizations. And that wasn't something that was like this huge conversation and deliberation. And it was just, everyone was like, yeah, definitely. And we made that change. And so I really appreciate that too. It's like, there's, I think, a lot of respect from right now, the older generation is just my mom and my aunt. So I think they're very, open and receptive to some of the ways that we can be making some changes. So that's something I also really appreciate and value.
So building off of this theme of family conversations, right? Whether Jenny, you're helping facilitate those between Next Gen and their parents, Hannah, you're literally having them with your mom and your aunt. I want to, pick up to say that in our research, we really heard the Next Gen say, we are thought of as kind of a material generation, but values are more important than valuables, right? Like values are what is driving us. And one woman, Randy.
Yes. I've been listening.
Hogan. Oh my God.
Our
So
organizer.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone.
Nice tech work.
Unbelievable. This is great. You're jumping in at the right time. So good to see your face. Sorry, we're working on this stuff in the back end. Sorry to jump in there, everybody. Charlotte, Jenny.
No worries.
It's good to see Randy.
I'll finish my comment, and then Randy, we'll hand it over to you. Just to say that one of the Next Gen donors we interviewed said, look, I feel like the previous generation believed on the one hand you made money, and on the other you gave it away. And our generation, as Jenny said, wants to live in alignment with their values, right? And so how do we clarify what those values are to then inform our decision making, whether it's about grant making or investment allocation or where we volunteer or how our governance practices are, how our operations are, how we hire people. I mean, on and on and on, sort of this living in alignment with our deeply held values. So, that is sometimes in family philanthropy where differences come up. But the irony is that when we ask Next Gen, well, where did you learn your values? Where did they come from? 89% said my parents and 63% said my grandparents. So there is actually this incredible reverence and appreciation for the people upon whose shoulders they stand, right? There is respect for the active living parents that they might be, or grandparents they might be working with, or the legacy of their predecessors who set this up, and sort of often navigating how do I honor them and that legacy, and then how do I enact the values that maybe I even got from them, but in a way that reflects the needs of today, right? I was just on a webinar earlier where they were talking about I think it's the Russell Sage Foundation was the first philanthropic foundation set up in the early 1900s in America. It's 2021. The needs are different. They evolve. And so, we hear the Next Gen say, I may have these deeply held values that I gained from my parents and grandparents, and I want to implement them differently given what the challenges are of today. So we're hearing right now Next Gen say, how do we pay attention to diversity, to equity, to inclusion, to justice? How do we not just go for compassion, but go for empathy and put our walk in someone else's shoes? As we were talking about earlier, how do we really build those relationships with grantees? So we just did a webinar with a young man who set up the Constellation Fund in the Twin Cities, actually. You probably know Andrew Dayton, right, Jenny? So he said really candidly, he said this on a public webinar, so I'm not speaking out of turn. He said, I grew up among privilege. I don't know what it's like to live in poverty. And so if I'm there trying to allocate our foundation's resources, I need to partner with the organizations who can tell me what their needs are. So the value of kind of the trust-based philanthropy of believing in the people who are closest to the ground and closest to the issues, is part of the way that Next Gen are living their values. And I guess I would say one step further, are not just trying to espouse those values, but to structure their philanthropy in a way that reflects those values. So I think about my own foundation, the board, Gold Segger Foundation. I joined when I was 29. Just this year, we joined a collaborative in Baltimore called Be More Invest, where for the first time, Hannah, you were talking about participatory philanthropy, 2/3 of the decision-making body are actually community-based leaders who are informing the grants, and in particular saying there's some really underserved Black and Brown-led organizations who don't usually get to philanthropic tables, and by shining that spotlight and having them in the decision-making seats really lifted up those organizations where resources were allocated this year to 10 groups over time with additional sort of technical assistance and capacity building assistance plus evaluation to help really support them through the hard work they're doing at the moment. So I agree with everything that's been said, living their values and sort of structuring philanthropy in a way that reflects that.
Thank you all. And I might just add that, you know, on this topic of honoring legacy, navigating power and privilege, and sorting out how you are carrying out your family values. Recently in the news again, the great-great-grandchildren of John D. Rockefeller, who are supporting Indigenous people on stopping oil and gas development. So family money made on oil now being spent to help communities that are impacted by that. And you know, one of the quotes from one of the family members said that, you know, this is oil money that came from the earth and we're investing it back into the earth. And so this was one picture of what we see in this navigation. And I think next, sort of, you know, considering the Rockefellers, the Gilded Age of giving, and Sharna, you've talked about the rising gen being the golden age. You know, what is next? You have, I don't know if you've shown, I didn't sit in the whole thing, but I don't know if you've shown the book. So everyone, Sharna's written this incredible book full of tips and advice and recommendations and stories and research. So you have some really great recommendations, things that we might be able to think about today that we can take action to engage the rising gen.
I appreciate it. I did put a link in the chat. We came out with an updated and expanded edition of the book this year because we wanted people, we heard from people as we released the first one to say, like, the research is great, the first person stories are amazing, and how do we translate this into tangible tips and best practices that we can take home? So in the back of the book, there are 3 best practice guides for families, advisors, and nonprofit professionals in case they're helpful to you. You know, I only have a couple minutes, so I have to think of how to be brief about it. But I guess I would say for everyone, the top takeaway for me is don't wait. I think, you know, we always think about our children as if they're 12 years old, but, you know, it turns out that there are 5 generations above the age of 21 in American society today. So we actually have children who are often adults by the time we think about engaging them. And it turns out from our research that 75% of the next gen we interviewed started volunteering before the age of 15. 90% started volunteering before the age of 21. 50% started giving before the age of 21. So sometimes by the time we bring them to the table, I don't know, 25, 30, whatever you feel comfortable, like your kids are married and off on their own, they've often been engaged in some sort of volunteerism and giving for 10, 15 years already. So they're eager, they're ready. And I think most of them would say they've been involved in maybe dinner table or informal conversation about giving, but it turns out that a small percentage has actually made it to a committee or a board table, only about 15 to 20%. And so they too are usually eager to move from that preparation and education place, sometimes called the kids table, to the decision-making table. So if you have an opportunity, I would say don't wait. You actually have eager and open-minded next gen who want to participate with you. And we find that giving is no longer about kind of waiting to pass the baton to the next generation after an elder generation passes. With 5 generations above the age of 21, people tend to want to give together. It doesn't mean they're going to agree on everything, and it won't be, you know, every moment won't be easy, but that relay race, baton passing metaphor, we like to call it fielding a team. You know, everyone's going to play a different position. Everyone has different skills. Some are rookies and some are veterans, but how can you sort of engage in the game together? So if you're a nonprofit professional, I would suggest a best practice would be to see the next gen as the adults that they are, not the children of so-and-so. Oftentimes people will approach me who know me from Baltimore, and I'm sure you have this experience too. And like, they just start in on, oh, I knew your parents when, and and right, as opposed to like, oh, she's 46 years old with a career of her own and maybe some ideas of her own. So, you know, how do you think about not just the children of, or as another next gen who we work with said, she said, I'm an earner, I'm not a child of, but I usually get approached as an ATM. You know, she's like, I actually have all kinds of talents and skills. I'm a lawyer. I've testified in front of Congress. Like, I've written legislation. You know, think about me again, not as a young person who's going to write you a check, but like as someone who could be a future leader for decades ahead. And I think the last thing I would say, and then thinking as a family member or a staff person, just connecting to it. I think we often feel plagued to figure out the best engagement strategy. And really my suggestion is to just ask them. Just ask them how they want to be engaged, and often they'll tell you. Yeah. So thank you for even being interested in asking this question. Happy to talk at length in Q&A or another time. It's my favorite.
Yeah. I think folks would have more to ask in the Q&A. Jenny, what is your experience?
Yeah, I don't know that I really can add anything more than what Sharna just shared, because I think I'm seeing so much of that exact same thing as, you know, again, parents looking to their kids to be leaders, right? And wanting that, kids wanting to step into their own leadership. I shouldn't say kids, I say that and I'm like, sometimes I'm talking about 60-year-olds, right? Like, it's crazy. But just that desire to be in it together, and that it's not like mom and dad telling kids, now here's what our values are and you should follow exactly along that, but just to have those very real conversations, and be thinking about how can we align what we all care about together. And I think that that's become a really important message that I'm hearing from more and more families is mom and dad just saying, no, this is just not going to be about what we want to do. We really want to know what you want to do, and how we can think about like what that approach looks like together. And what I've loved seeing is even in some families, you end up in these situations with, you know, potentially next gen who have kind of differing ideas, but they're both so generous to each other, right? So one person might be like, I really want to think about education. And someone else is like, I really want to think about food. And then the first person is like, oh, well, now let's maybe think about how education and food intersect. So you're just seeing this just like generosity, right? And people wanting to think about like how to be collaborative. I was also trying to think about, you know, what would be my advice? I was a nonprofit fundraiser for 15 years before I came to the Minneapolis Foundation. And to Sharna's point again, like, man, if you can involve that next gen, it just, you're going to gain so much. You're going to get skills. They're going to bring their network. They're going to really deeply want to help you because they're interested in how you are making impact and want to help you make that impact. And they're potentially going to bring along, you know, their treasure as well, and their family's interest potentially. I have seen more and more families engaging entire family members in site visits now, so that it's not just kind of mom and dad go off and meet with the nonprofit staff like they always have. They're saying, you know, we've been meeting for a number of years. We want our kids to start coming along too. And I actually think that this pandemic time in this world of Zoom, I've seen be able to elevate next gen participation because they're like so comfortable with Zoom, right? And having it be on this platform, I think kind of levels the playing field a little bit. So it's not just like nonprofit staff being like, oh, hello, mom and dad, who we've seen multiple times. It's kind of everybody being on Zoom and really feeling equal in kind of participation. And so I think that that's also been a pretty unique thing to see. So if you have opportunity to talk to your donors about, hey, is this something your kids might want to learn about? I think take that opportunity, at least ask. Sharna talked a little bit about legacy values, kids really wanting to honor that. I think what I'm seeing is a lot of next gen, exactly to what Sharna said, and saying, I get my values primarily from my parents. I want to honor those values. I really do want to know what it is that they care about and the organizations that they support. So I'm encouraging more and more parents to have those very real conversations with their kids, to say, like, here is what we really care about and why, right? To really have that why conversation, because I think that's really what that next gen wants to hear. Is they want to hear, like, what is it about that that's made you be really passionate about that issue, or you're passionate about that nonprofit. And so, I, again, just encourage you to be able to kind of harness those values conversations with your donors and potentially their next gen as well.
Fantastic. We'll hear from Hannah next, and then after that, we'll start with your questions. If anything comes up, please chat them in the Q&A. So Hannah, on this piece around your learning and engagement, what comes to mind for you? What's been your experience?
Yeah, I think one thing that has been really helpful for me is coming into the role and just realizing how much there is to learn, and just the amount of resources that are out there. So everything from, listening to, there's tons of podcasts on philanthropy. And so listening to podcasts and reading blogs, meeting with other funders. I have a lot of friends that are in nonprofits that are not necessarily, that are out of the state of Maine, that I can have, pretty open conversations with. I had a mentor for philanthropy. Some of, but I'd say like the most, what's led to the most significant change in the way that we both the way we operate and our best practices and how we function as a foundation, but then also specific to our mission and what we are funding has really come from nonprofits that we're working with, that we've built relationships with. And I'm just continually thankful for those conversations. One of the things that comes to mind is we had worked with, we were getting somewhere around like 400 proposals a year. And it was just clear that we needed to narrow our mission, because we're still such a small foundation. We're having to deny, so many organizations that were applying because we just didn't have enough funds. And we had worked on a theory of change, and we did these listening sessions, and we met with a nonprofit in Washington County, and there were a few Passamaquoddy elders that were in the room, and we laid out our fancy theory of change diagram, and fortunately someone in the room spoke up and said, that's nice, like what you are looking to fund, it's like, that's very nice, but it's completely irrelevant to our community. And then shared more about some of the challenges that they're facing, which were I could see it was just so obvious in that conversation. Like, oh, we're talking about, outdoor recreation and like school gardens, and those things are important. But if we're also looking to be supporting, folks that are in really rural geographic areas, and really thinking about access and what is relevant within our mission to communities across the state. So, and then also someone reached out to me and said, why is this your budget? Like your budget is such a, it's such a pain in the neck for us to get all of our, numbers to fit into your budget. Can we do something different? And it was just a form that someone had shared with us that was and something really easy for us to just say, oh yeah, you can just, submit what you're sending to in another application, So that's one thing that I know that can be, obviously there's, there can be challenges to meet with a funder and, share some of those things, but it has been super helpful for us to get some of that feedback. And I think that has come from, relationships and meeting with people. And I knew from the very beginning that I'd never have felt like an expert. I'm often meeting with an executive director, especially in Maine, where there is an older population and there's still a lot of, 60, 70-year-old men heading, a lot of, especially some of the conservation organizations that we work with. And like, they have had years of experience. And I think, especially when I was first involved in this work, I'm a 20 something that, I just always feel like I have so much to learn from so many of the folks that I'm meeting with. And I think one of the things that I find it a bit challenging, which might be a little aside, but I hear often that, like I think about capitalism saying there's, one form of currency, and with a foundation, that's what we are, in a sense, is like this body of money that's making donations. And, just like, money doesn't make people happy, like that, having just a very transactional relationship within a foundation feels really unfulfilling to me. And at the same time, like I want our currency to be more relational and more about collaboration. But then I also hear folks say, like, we want foundations to like write a big check multiple years and like get lost and get out of our way. And I completely understand that too. So it's like, for me, one of the things that I think about a lot is like, where's the balance of making sure that what we're, hoping for, is what's fulfilling to us, is not creating, it's not cumbersome to a nonprofit organization, but the collaboration that we have is adding value, ideally. And so, yeah, kind of a long-winded response to that, but I certainly see a big part of my learning having come from the folks that I'm working most closely with, which is the leaders of nonprofits that are willing to share really honestly with us, from mission to, our application being a pain in the neck.
I'd like to go a little bit deeper with you, Hannah, because you've really hit on something important. You have an open, inquisitive mind. You want to learn from your nonprofit partners. I think, my sense or feeling is that the folks that want the check and just the foundation to go away are dealing with different foundation leaders who may feel like they have more of the answers than the nonprofit partners that they're working with, which I hear in you have a different place where you stand alongside your partners. What would you say to nonprofit leaders who are on this, who are listening right now, how to, how do you start that conversation with a funding partner to open up in the way that finally the folks that you were talking with said, nice presentation, but what we'd really like to talk about is something else. Is there anything that comes to mind for you?
Right. Well, I think, in listening to Jenny and Sharna, it's good to hear just the way in which, because like I said, I don't have a whole lot of interaction with, people with wealth and other foundations that are next gen. And, but it's good to hear the ways in which, next gen donors are operating and thinking differently. What I found, and I don't know if sometimes I think this may be a little bit specific to a state where there is so much, you know a lot of people, and it's easy to connect with other foundations. But my impression from, all of the foundation leaders that I've gotten to know is I don't personally know folks that would be turned off by getting that feedback. I think it's a group of people that are really receptive and open, and everyone striving to do the best that they can with this limited time on the planet. And so I know that those foundations exist that are a little bit more closed, and like you can't even find a way to contact them. And you have to try to like get to know someone that knows someone that can finally connect you. But I don't see that happening a whole lot. Yeah, I don't know that I have really specific advice other than I think just like being willing to like take that risk of just being honest and transparent, and like people need to hear it. I mean, I think that you know, I think that if there's foundations that are operating more in a traditional ways that are a challenge for organizations, like they need to hear that, you know, feedback as well. So
thank you, and thanks for leading in that way, and encouraging folks to build those relationships in the way that you've fostered them. We'll go to questions now. There are a few questions that have been submitted both in the Q&A and the chat, and folks can continue to offer those. Here's a question, and it's something that I was asked knowing that we were having this panel. It kind of speaks to really directly around how to engage next gen donors. So folks inside nonprofit organizations, I think this question is asking, who are kind of resistant or questioning or stuck in old ways around, you know, what do they, sorry, I just lost the question. Thanks for the new questions coming in. Who don't understand that the system has to change. For example, we just have to balance the books. Or somebody else that I heard from recently who said, well, we're not so interested in having them join our board of directors until they're ready to write a big check. So maybe Sharna, you can speak to this point. And I know there's a lot of reasons why to start now engaging next gen, but when it comes to really sort of making the case for internal staff who are resistant or questioning, what would you recommend?
There was some research done. I have to admit, I can't remember the researchers off the top of my head. It wasn't my own research, but it came out a couple of years ago that said that after the first parent passes away, only 45% of the kids stick with that parent's advisor. And after the second parent passes, only 2% stick with the parents' advisors. So I believe this was done in the financial sector, but I think you can extrapolate that unless a lot of advisors, a lot of nonprofit professionals who have relationships with one generation of family, I think assume like that will be the next staff person's problem, or oh no, the family has such a connection to our organization. Of course the kids will follow, or the parents, they've definitely told their kids to keep supporting this organization, where maybe they haven't. And so I guess for me, I do think it's important as professionals to face that music, that reality, and sort of say, like, we need to ask the parents to introduce us to the kids. We need to make the connection, build the relationship, be aware that we can't assume that funding will continue. I mean, I think that there is research that shows that the ways that it is happening, right? With Generation Impact, we interviewed this next gen man who basically said, when my grandpa passed away, the nonprofit started calling and said, your grandfather has been funding our organization for a long time. And out of respect for his grandfather's legacy, he took all those meetings, but it was the ones who, realized that he was a graduate of Harvard Business School, actually, and really cared about the impact of his work, that they brought presentations and said, like, oh, your grandfather's foundation has been funding our work for all these years. Here's what the funding made a difference to do, right? That really landed on him. So I also think there are ways of connecting better than others. And then I guess my tactical suggestion, we're like third-party consultants, there are folks like Jenny, other professionals around the country who are trained on doing this too, to come in, Randy, you are too, right? To come in and bring tools to help an organization have these kind of reflective conversations, even with their staff, that you would then have with the families you're serving. So like one really practical suggestion is, if you want a family to do a values exercise across the generation, a legacy exercise, a money exercise, you want to think about how to shift the generational dialogue, do it with your staff first. So, we go in and we ask if staff to reflect on what are the generational personalities around the room. How do traditionalist boomers X and Y come to the work? And they start to realize that we're really set in our own generational lens based on the events and conditions that informed our worldview growing up. And so how do we then bridge to understand how a millennial thinks, or how a Gen Zer thinks, or vice versa, how a boomer or traditionalist thinks? We have to work on that. And just that aha moment of doing the same work you would do with the family at the staff level, even if they're in finance and accounting and not in grant making, is actually pretty eye-opening, I think. Creates a vulnerability that, we have a bridge to build to the next generation. So I hope some of that is helpful.
Yeah. This next question, maybe Jenny, this seems like a good one for you, around any shifts or trends that you're seeing in terms of the funding cycle from, say, short term, 1 to 3 years, to longer term, specifically with the rising gen.
Oh, that's hard. I feel like not markedly yet. And so I'll try to be more specific about that. So fourth gen, which was our kind of collective giving program that really, as I said, kind of targets 20s to 40s, that intentionally has a different topic every year. So very much like we're saying, that's the point of this, is to kind of learn about the practice of philanthropy. And this is kind of how we would suggest going about it. And some people stick with it for multiple years. Other people do it for a couple of years and then might start volunteering with one of the nonprofit organizations that they were introduced to through their fourth gen experience, right? So I think it is creating opportunities for people to go deeper and get more involved with nonprofits or issues that they really care about. And I think we are seeing more next gen wanting that, and not necessarily wanting like, every year we have like a new thing that we're just going to like keep, moving around. I think that there is this desire to see real impact, which I think a lot of my experience, a lot of next gen are like, yeah, that doesn't happen within like a year, right? Like this is probably like a longer term, relationship. I think to Sharna's point, it does feel more relational and less of, well, of course we support the opera because we've always supported the opera, right? So I think that they're not interested in that, but they are interested in, let me have a long-term relationship with you, right? So if that makes sense, right? I think hopefully I've like deliberated between the two of those, or distinguished between the two. I think what I'm also seeing is more and more next gen being open to all sorts of different kinds of funding. So very open to general operating support, because I think a lot of nonprofits are saying, this is what we need, and this is how we're going to make impact. It goes to that trust-based philanthropy, right? To say like, trust us, we know what we're doing, give us general operating support. So I think there's a lot more willingness to support in that way. And I think that there's more willingness to think about how do we help nonprofits leverage even more? So not just getting general operating support, but potentially bringing their networks and or other technical assistance, capacity building, that sort of thing to the nonprofit as well, right? So it's like more than money. It's a deeper relationship and willing to leverage their networks to say, I see that, I think you need this. Do you need this? How can I help you get that? And maybe it's money, maybe it's a grant, but maybe it's like somebody I know. Sharna talked about the founder of the Constellation Fund. I think one of the just bread and butter pieces of Constellation is they have this program called Beyond Dollars. It's all about technical assistance. And a lot of it is about like the connections that staff has and who else they can bring to nonprofits to really like help them capacity build and be able to, leverage even more. And I feel like that's maybe what I'm seeing more of from Next Gen versus like, we'll give you money in February instead of December. It feels like the ways in which people are giving is just different.
Thank you. So we just have a few more minutes. I have one more question I'll ask. It's a biggie, but before we get into that, I just want to let everyone know that there'll be a survey after the session. And there's also the opportunity, as Jeanette said, to contribute to the strategic planning for Maine Philanthropy Center. If you're interested in diving a little bit deeper on this topic of next gen donors, rising gen, or folks that might be interested in a peer cohort, please make those comments, and that will help to develop some programming. So the big one, and it's curious to hear stories. We don't have a lot of time for a lot of stories, but what happens with families who have wildly divergent values, or people struggling with talking about reparations and or structural racism? Feels like that's one for Sharna, unless Hannah, you want to pick that up, or certainly you've already mentioned, Hannah, that your family doesn't have wildly divergent values. You've sort of easily come into this, or naturally come into this agreement that the work that you're doing in Maine is addressing important issues, returning land and so forth. Sharna, what about you? Wildly divergent values.
Yeah, I would say it's actually pretty normal. So just know that you're in good company, that it often happens. I like to say that in family philanthropy, there are two words, family and philanthropy. And it's really hard to have both be equal. One has to trump the other. So if you're interested in giving to the same organizations forever, even after you pass, then philanthropy is really the priority for you. And you have to put that in structure, endow your gifts, write it in your will, your bylaws, your estate plan, whatever you want to do to secure that. But know that your next generation might not feel, they will honor your requests, but they might not feel as engaged, right? Because you're choosing to prioritize your philanthropic giving. But if you want family to be the priority, then that does require some flexibility, right? So families are saying, if our values are not aligned, or if our values are aligned, but how we want to implement those values look differently, then we may have to put in structures to make that happen. And I guess a long time ago, I realized my job isn't to help resolve all of this for a family. My job is to help understand where the family is and to help them find the structure that reflects where they are. So sometimes that means having a common giving pool that reflects the majority or the decision makers' values, and then setting up some discretionary buckets for other folks who need to express their values or their interests differently than the main. Sometimes families have set up separate donor advised funds to actually have separate vehicles to make that happen, right? Or in this small occasion, if you can't, find another solution, have split a foundation. But that I've really seen that happen in the minority. So again, I try to actually start just having a really candid conversation with a family. What are your values? Like Hannah said, that's where you got to start. Big picture. What are your values? What's your vision? And can you describe whether family or philanthropy is your priority now, and therefore build structure from that? So I think the systemic racism piece is like one example of how that larger question is showing up at the moment. But it's really the same kind of a question with a lot of intensity around it that we come up with, I want to fund scholarships versus microcredit loans, like I want to fund in the US versus another country. It's a pattern that we see when you're bringing in next generation, and just one for a family to reconcile.
Thank you. Other thoughts, Jenny or Hannah, on this, or anything else that has come to mind since we've been discussing all of this today? And by the way, I'm asking folks, just chat in a word or a phrase on this session.
I would just add, and this is quick since I know we need to go, but I worked with a private family foundation that actually developed two mission statements. One that was externally shared and was really about their kind of external philanthropy, and then one that was internal and about their family. And I thought that was like a great recognition of kind of what Sharna was speaking to about like both the family piece and holding that is pretty important. But then an external mission statement that they shared with the community at large. But that the family went through a process to develop both of those, and was attempting to hold them equally kind of as priorities. But just something I thought was a cool model.
That is cool. Thank you. Any final thoughts, Hannah?
Hmm. I don't think so.
Left it all out there.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Sharna, Jenny, and Hannah, this has been fantastic. Thanks for taking the time. I'm so excited that even with the technical difficulties and the sad part that we can't physically get together in Maine for this conference, the reason that we're able to have Jenny and Sharna join us is that we are virtual. And so I'm really glad that you all were able to join and to be able to make this time and share your knowledge and insights. And thanks to everyone who participated for your questions and curiosity. I guess we're off to the next session. Thank you. Anything, Gabe?
Yeah, sure. Just some brief housekeeping. Thank you, Randy, Shauna, Hannah, Jenny. Great job. Really appreciate it. Randy, finally, so good to see you in here today. Sorry about that. Yeah, just a brief programming note. We're sort of got an open time for the next 12 minutes or so. And then stretch break and do what you need to do. And then at 2:30, Latasha Brown will be speaking in the main session.
Not
so you can find that. Yeah, not to be missed. We're really excited to have her. And that's it. Thank you all. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Bye. Thank you.
Jeez.
Is it closed?
I'm going to stop it. I'll see you later.
Okay.